What's up, everybody, boys and girls, OCD sufferers of the world? Welcome back for another video here. Sorry, took a little hiatus there. Today, I got a question recently that I figured I could make a whole video about, and it's gonna be an important one. Again, I don't want to be one of these people who makes 1,000 videos and doesn't say anything. I want to hit points really, really hard that matter. And so the question I got here, or the email basically said, I've been doing exposures now for, I think the person said, for the better part of a year. I'm not making any progress. Why are my exposures failing to produce the intended results? And my guess is that your OCD is finding ways to creep in and undermine the effectiveness of the exposure. And this is something that's very common, and it's very common to most themes of OCD, especially the more pure O type ones. The ones in which part of our rituals for a lot of us are to sort of ritualize in our head. So to seek some reassurance, to remember something about the past, to just tell yourself something along the lines of it's not real, it's OCD, or to even downplay the intended goal of the exposure while you're doing the exposure. So for instance, let's use HOCD as an example, because as I've said before, I think like 30% of the population has HOCD. All right, so you HOCD people, myself included in that, you're not alone. If that provides any relief to you at all, there's literally millions of people, I think, in the world suffering from specifically HOCD. It is such a popular theme. So just to give you an example, right? Here are some of the common exposures for HOCD. Stuff like hanging out at a gay bar, looking at images of attractive people of the same sex, reading coming out stories, yada yada. There's anything that you can think of that's intended to actually make you spike. It's intended to amplify your anxiety. The problem here is during these exposures, people, and I did this for a long time, and I'm now talking to a lot of people, and I'm seeing this with almost everybody. They're willing, really, really eager to get into the exposure response prevention treatment. They're willing to do everything that they can, all with the goal of not being bothered by their OCD anymore. I think they're understanding, most of them are understanding that that's the goal, is to simply habituate to your feared possibility coming true, or habituate to the feelings that come up from the thought or the fear itself. But what takes a lot of time for people to realize is that their OCD is creeping in and undermining their exposures. So for instance, take one of those examples. I go sit at a gay bar. Well, my OCD is going to try to protect me there. The OCD is going to come jumping in and saying stuff like, you don't feel right here. This isn't doing anything for you. You can tell that you don't belong here. You're not attracted to any of these people of the same sex. So here, you've now managed to turn an exposure inadvertently into a ritual. You've now gone and essentially checked. You've gone and sat at a gay bar and looked around, and you've, in your mind, told yourself this story. This isn't for me. I'm not into any of those people. Same thing can happen when you're, say, looking at images of attractive people of the same sex, or even watching same-sex pornography, and you can be checking. You can be checking your arousal. You can be saying stuff inside your head like that. These little reassurance statements that you can be making automatically. Ugh, I'm not into that. This isn't doing anything for me. And then, oddly enough, you walk away feeling better after doing an exposure. That shouldn't be the case. If that is the case, you most likely did some sort of ritual, some sort of ritual in the process of your attempted exposure. And here's the thing, I think most people know it, and I think that they believe that this is some way to kind of skirt doing the treatment full on because they don't really want to consider the possibility that their feared consequence might come true or might be true. But at the same time, they're technically doing an exposure, so they're doing everything right. Look, this is completely up to you. It is entirely up to you whether you decide to fully embrace the concept of uncertainty, to fully embrace that the treatment involves actually intentionally making yourself feel less certain, making the question mark bigger, making the doubt bigger. So you have to be on guard for these things, these little creepy OCD attempts at ritualizing during your exposures, because you can end up spinning your wheels for years and years. And deep down, I think you know, again, if you walk away from an exposure and you're feeling better, or you feel like you were headed in a direction of getting an answer, that's bad. That's not what you want to do. So it's hard. I make these videos and I just try to encourage people to trust me that I know what I'm talking about. I went through this. I have studied with a lot of really, really good OCD specialists, and I understand that it's really hard to take the plunge, but this is the truth, and this is the big paradox of OCD. The more you try to get an answer, or the more you try to get the just right feeling, the more you try to undo the discomfort, the worse it all gets. The more you intentionally make yourself less certain, you increase in your own mind the doubt and the possibility that the thing you fear is actually true, and the more clarity that you actually get. It is a perfect paradox like that. And so again, if I can just beg you to trust me on this, the more you try to get certainty, the less certainty you will have. The more you encourage uncertainty, confuse yourself, intentionally make the question mark bigger, the more certainty you will have. But again, I don't want you to use certainty as the goal here. I want you to remember that the goal of treatment truly is to just habituate to both the thoughts and the feelings, so when they come up, they just don't take any of your time anymore. It does not matter. And I'll just speak real quickly on a point there, because people will say, like, how does it not matter? I don't understand how you can ever get to a point where, let's use HOCD again as an example, where you can actually accept the possibility that you might really be gay. And I get it, because your OCD right now is telling you there is no way you can ever get to that point. That the more confused you get, the more sort of you move away from certainty and you intentionally confuse yourself, the worse all of your symptoms are going to get. But I'm going to tell you this, and I beg that you trust me. It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do, your OCD has nothing to do with uncertainty itself. It has everything to do with your intolerance of uncertainty. So I will give you a perfect example of this. I think I mentioned this on another video, but there was an episode of the OCD Stories. I forget who the therapist was that was on talking, was talking about this concept of, I believe, a buffalo. When there's a storm coming in, all the animals tend to run away from the storm. And what ends up happening is they're running this way, and the storm that's coming, apologize for my long acrylic fingernails, I'm a guitar player. The storm that is coming in ends up staying with them for a long time. But the buffalo have this strange instinct where they run into the storm. They intentionally run into the storm, so the storm is coming, they run into it. Sure, they get knocked around by the storm. But interestingly enough, they find that they get through it faster. That's a perfect mindset to have for your OCD. And here's the truth. Just take a real hard exposure, for example. I've talked about mine. I've talked about the lengths that I went to. The furthest length that I went to was going on those sites where you can see other human beings in real time. And luckily, if you're a guy with HOCD, you can find a million guys butt naked on the other end playing with themselves, and you can have conversations with them. It is the gayest thing that you could do, short of just going out and physically being with someone of the same sex. So I would go to those lengths. And if what you believe your OCD is telling you, if you actually think that that's true, then wouldn't you think that I would just be absolutely crushed? I would be devastated. My uncertainty at this point was at an all-time high. I just masturbated to another male human being on the other line. We were talking to each other. And I was able to do it. At this point, after an exposure like that, it's not only uncertainty, it's almost like, dude, you just proved to yourself. You just proved to yourself that you're actually gay. You really just did. And this concept of running into the storm, every time I would do that, and again, I don't want you to have this goal in mind, but I just want to use this as an example to show you that it has nothing to do with your uncertainty. Your feelings have nothing to do with your uncertainty. They have everything to do with your intolerance of uncertainty. So every time I would do a hard exposure like that, within an hour, I felt entirely free from OCD. It's truth. Now, it may have lingered longer in the beginning because I hadn't equipped myself yet with the tools to sort of let this stuff bounce off me. But if it were true that this were about uncertainty, well, I just made myself so much more uncertain. Wouldn't it make sense that I would feel so much worse? Like permanently worse. But I don't. And it's the same thing. You know this, even if you're doing exposure homework or not. You know that there are days that you feel good and days that you don't feel good. Nothing has changed. You may or may not have done a ritual. You may or may not have done an exposure. You may not have done anything. But for some reason, some days the thought doesn't bother you, and other days it feels like you're going to have a full-blown panic attack and you can't take it at all. So it's a perfect example to just show you, like, the content hasn't changed, the thought itself hasn't changed, so why is it now that it's not bothering you as much? Well, who knows? If you're not doing any of the homework, your brain could just be settled down that day. Your anxiety, whatever's going on in the circuitry of your brain just may not be as active. But if you continually practice exposure response prevention, if you continually run into the storm, and you don't let any of these little mini rituals undermine your exposures, this stuff will stop bothering you. It'll stop bothering you. That does not mean you get certainty at the end. It does mean, though, that you get clarity, you get your time back, and you'll find that your anxiety overall for all kinds of stuff is much lower. You are much more tolerant of uncertainty. You're much more tolerant of the feelings of anxiety and discomfort that come in. And that's why I can't encourage this enough. But only you know. You could be lying to your therapist for 30 years about these little attempts to undermine your exposures and to turn your exposures into full-blown rituals. Even though that's not what you want to do, it's your OCD making you do that. Don't trust your OCD. Your OCD is a liar. It will lie to you every single day and keep telling you this ritual will be the last one. You need to do this right now. You can't go on without this certainty. I promise you can go on without certainty. I don't have certainty still. And I have a girlfriend, and my ROCD hasn't been bad for a long time. My HOCD doesn't show up anymore. If it does, I jump right back into an exposure. And I remind myself, hey, I may never be out of the woods on this. You may never, ever know if this is OCD or not. You may never, ever figure out if you're gay or straight or bi, or if you're going to kill your family, or if you're going to get AIDS from touching a doorknob. But you don't need the certainty. So I'll say it again. Don't let your OCD find ways to undermine your exposure homework, and don't buy into the story that this is all about uncertainty. It's all about intolerance of uncertainty. Okay? In fact, like I said, you can make your uncertainty even worse. You can make it so bad that you literally have no idea. Okay? And simultaneously be free from OCD. Okay? And that should be all the evidence you need to be encouraged to actually take the plunge and to fully embrace this idea. All right, you guys. Hey, feel free, shoot me an email. I'm coaching a lot of people, and it's gone really well. It's really been, I don't want to say enjoyable because I have to hear, people's worst fears all day, and I have to see people struggling. But we make light of it. We try to find ways to laugh about this stuff, because at the end of the day, this stuff is so crazy that it's so ridiculous that on some level you got to find some humor in it. So yeah, keep it up, and I'll talk to you guys soon.